If you were here Sunday night, we were there in 1 Kings chapter number 17. We were looking at the faith of Elijah and how that his faith was tested over and over again, but a man strong in faith and had the right response as we see it in the scripture anyways, very quickly to respond of a yes in his faithfulness. And just as I was asked to preach tonight, I felt led to go back here to 1 Kings. And really there's so much even in that chapter that we looked at last time there on Sunday night that you could go back and you could go through a lot of other points to be taken care of there, the miraculous hand of God and different things such as that. But we're going to be looking here in chapter number 18. Before we read, just in case there are those that weren't here on Sunday night, we were talking about how the title was Faith to Faith, and how that Elijah, as he was called upon by God to do things that might have been uncomfortable, that he might have been called to do things that didn't make sense at all, and those things that were just that way that he was called upon to do, his answer was yes. And that led him down the path all the way to the widow of Zarephath's house, and where then she was called upon to put faith in the man of God with their son and her life, because they were on their last meal. And he said, "Fix for me first," which no doubt would be hard to do, because that would be against everything that you would think of a man of God being able to do. But that's what God wanted, because he had something even better planned for that lady, and got to see the miraculous hand of God provide for them throughout this famine that was going on in the land. And so brought them to there, and then ultimately her son would become ill and even unto death. And he saw that, was confused himself as to what was going on, but pleaded before God for the young man's life, and God granted that wish. And her son was brought back to life, and she was then thankful to God and saw God's hand move in her life. And what a blessing that was that we looked, and how greatly our need in accepting what God has for us, those tests of faith. Some of you may have already experienced in the last 2 days, you've already experienced other tests of faith that God said, "I want you to do this. Step out in faith, and I will take care of you." And we're going to look further tonight. We're going to see some more faith challenges. We're going to see more lives that were affected by Elijah and his faith to God. So as we begin here in 1 Kings chapter number 18, it says in verse number 1, "And it came to pass after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, Go show thyself unto Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth. And Elijah went to show himself unto Ahab, and there was sore famine in Samaria." So we see exactly as God had commanded. I'll probably be stopping my reading throughout here every now and then. But we see God doing exactly what he said. He told Elijah that famine would last until Elijah was told to come back and let Ahab know, okay, you're about to get rain. And so God's proving true and faithful once again, as he does time and time again. And so now Elijah is called to go before Ahab. And once again, it is a test of faith, because Ahab's been looking for him. Ahab has not been pleased with him ever since he told him the news about the drought that was going to take place. And we're going to find out that hadn't just disappeared or gone away. It was still ongoing. But God called him to go ahead and go before Ahab and tell him what the Lord was about to do. Now we find another man that comes into the story here in verse number 3. It says, "And Ahab called Obadiah, which was the governor of his house." Now we see the parentheses here. "Now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly. For it was so when Jezebel cut off the prophets of the Lord, that Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50 in a cave, and fed them with bread and water." Verse number 5, And Ahab said unto Obadiah, Go into the land, unto all fountains of water, and unto all brooks. Peradventure we may find grass to save the horses and mules alive, that we lose not all the beasts. So they divided the land between them to pass throughout it. Ahab went the one way by himself, and Obadiah went another way by himself. And as Obadiah was in the way, behold, Elijah met him. And he knew him and fell on his face and said, Art thou that my lord Elijah? And he answered him, I am. Go tell thy Lord, behold, Elijah is here. Verse number 9. And he said, Obadiah speaking here, What have I sinned, that thou wouldest deliver thy servant into the hand of Ahab to slay me? As the Lord thy God liveth, there is no nation or kingdom whither my Lord hath not sent to seek thee. And when they said he is not there, he took an oath of the kingdom and nation that they found thee not. And now thou sayest, Go tell thy Lord, behold, Elijah is here. And it shall come to pass, as soon as I am gone from thee, that the Spirit of the Lord shall carry thee whither I know not. And so when I come and tell Ahab, and he cannot find thee, he shall slay me, but I thy servant fear the Lord from my youth. Was it not told my Lord what I did when Jezebel slew the prophets of the Lord? How I hid 100 men of the Lord's prophets by 50 in a cave, and fed them with bread and water? And now thou sayest, Go tell thy Lord, behold, Elijah is here, and he shall slay me. Let's stop our reading right there. So we find Obadiah here, and very quickly they state that he was a man that feared God. He trusted God. But in the position that he was in, he was with a man that was far from trusting God, was far from acknowledging God, really. But Obadiah is the leader there, and it looks like Obadiah has drifted away in his closeness to God. Because we find Obadiah here, and he sees Elijah and recognizes Elijah. That also tells you that he knew somewhat of Elijah's ministry and how the Lord was using Elijah. And he comes before Elijah now, and Elijah's very quick to tell him what he wants. He says, Hey, go tell Ahab I want to see him. And then Obadiah has just as quick of a response. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding? I can't believe you're trying to do this to me. You don't understand. He's been looking for you. He's been searching all across the country for you. He's had people going and searching for you, and he hasn't found you. And if I go before him and say, Oh, King, you know Elijah? Yeah, I found him. It's not going to go so well for me. There's not going to be a smile on his face. Plus, if I tell him that, even beyond that, and then I tell him that you want to meet him, I go to tell him, and knowing you, Lord's going to call you somewhere else. By the time I get back and I say, Ahab, here's Elijah, you're going to be gone. And when you're gone, he's going to think I'm lying to him and it was all a joke, and then off with my head. I don't think so. I'm not doing this. There's no way. This could be my life. And we find a man, Obadiah, who obviously feared God, was called upon to make a faith decision. It was a test of faith, because the man of God had a message from God for him to do a certain task. And we find Obadiah's response. In Sunday night, we saw that Elijah, it says, when the Lord would bring up a task before him, no matter whether it was convenient, whether it made sense, or whatever the case may be, even if his life was going to be in jeopardy, it says And Elijah went. And Elijah went. He was building upon his faith. He was strong in faith. But we find a man here, Obadiah, that might have been a little weak in faith. And you say, well, Elijah, he was a man of God, like a preacher. And so obviously he's going to have a life that's strong in faith. He's supposed to, after all. He's a man of God. But Obadiah, he's just a regular man. And so his faith would be weak. But that's not the case. God doesn't judge or look at our lives as, well, that's a preacher and he's supposed to have stronger faith than everybody else. But really, as a child of God, we're supposed to have strong faith in our Lord. Even if we are not called in a ministry or such as that, we're still supposed to have strong faith. He said the just, if we looked in Romans, as we looked at in Sunday night, the just shall live by faith. If we want to be obedient to God, we're going to live by faith. And Obadiah here, as I was reading this, I began to see how that sometimes I could be guilty of an Obadiah mentality. You see, many times within our human nature and our selfishness, our weakness, we find ourselves like Obadiah. First off, we see when Obadiah was faced with this test of faith, he feared God, but he feared man more. We see he feared God, but he feared man more. Because Obadiah knew that Elijah was speaking what God had told him. Yet Obadiah was fearful for his life. When truly our lives are in the hand of God as a child of God, we can trust in Him. He knows what's best for our life. He knows what He wants to accomplish within our lives. And Obadiah was fearful. I'm not being down on Obadiah, because you and I can do the same thing. When God calls upon us to do something that could mean some persecution, I believe in the days ahead, as a child of God, we might see more and more of that. Outside of America, it's already happening. It's ramped up in foreign countries, as it was already that case, but even more so now, as we hear our missionaries from India, as they tell us in almost every letter that persecution is rising and Christians are being persecuted. It's a fearful thing. But we must fear God more than we fear man. And we must see that what God wants for us is best overall. Putting fear of man to the side and saying, God, if you've told me to do this, I know I'm supposed to be obedient, and I need to do this because you say so. Obadiah was facing a battle in this test of faith of whether he was going to fear God or whether he was going to fear man. We also see here in Obadiah's test of faith, we began to see that he was content with past successes. He was content with past successes. I couldn't help but see a little bit of humor in this passage when he gets here, because Obadiah is going through this and he's telling Elijah, just pleading out before Elijah, I don't want to do this, basically. This is not something that I want to do. And then we find him when he comes down to verse number 13. He says, was it not told, my Lord, talking to Elijah here, was it not told you, Elijah, what I did when Jezebel slew the prophets of the Lord? How I hid 100 men of the Lord's prophets by 50 in a cave and fed them with bread and water? So he comes before Elijah, and he says, Elijah, do you not know what I've done? I mean, I've been faithful. I took men that were prophets, that were for the Lord. I hid them in a cave. I fed them. I took care of them, gave them drink. Did you not know that I did that? It was like, is this not enough? That was something else as I began to read this. You know, Amanda Lynn, as she is learning, but she is also teaching us a lot of lessons as we go. And Amanda Lynn's 2 years old, and so every now and then I or Julie will have her do something. We set her with a task to go get us something, and there's been more than one occasion where I've said, Amanda Lynn, I need you to go get this for Daddy. And Amanda Lynn, she likes to help, but she'll go and I'll see her take off, and somewhere between where the thing was I asked her to get and where I am, there was something that was a little bit easier to get. And so she would run up and she would go, "Here, Daddy." It's like, but this isn't what I asked you to get. Well, here, Daddy. But that's not what I ask. Or there's other times when I'll ask her to do something, and this is just trying to work on Daddy's soft heart, and she'll say, "But Daddy, I love you." It's like, oh my goodness. But we see here that Obadiah, he's trying to avoid what God's asked him to do. God's given him a command. He wants him just to go to Ahab, tell him that Elijah wants to see him. And Obadiah immediately has an excuse. But Elijah, I mean, come on. 100 prophets? I saved their lives? It's not good enough, huh? Well, I thought it was pretty good. So Elijah, now he says, I'm not going to go anywhere. I will be right here. You get Ahab, tell him to come, and I'll be right here. But sometimes when God calls us to take a step of faith, and we're in that test of faith, sometimes we can be like Obadiah and say, but Lord, you remember that one time when I did really good? And you remember that one day where I felt like I didn't even lie throughout the day? Lord, do you remember that time when I helped at church? They were asking for volunteers. I actually volunteered for something. You remember that? Lord, do you remember that time, when so-and-so, their car was broke down, and I had a lot to do that day, but I stopped and I helped them because that's what I was supposed to do. Still not good enough, huh? But, Lord, I read my Bible today. I've been really good. I've been staying in the Word. I've been reading faithfully. I've even been praying and remembering everyone on the prayer list in prayer. You still want me to do that, huh? So Obadiah is left with a decision, as are we. When God calls us to do something, and it's a step of faith, we can go to our excuses, we can go to our fears, and Elijah says, I'm going to be here, trust me, go do what God said. And we find that Obadiah made the right decision. And verse number 14, we'll just pick up there. It says, "And now thou sayest, Go tell thy Lord, Behold, Elijah is here, and he shall slay me. And Elijah said, As the Lord of hosts liveth, before whom I stand, I will surely show myself unto him today. So Obadiah went and met Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah." So now Obadiah has done the faithful thing, and he's gone and he's accomplished what God has told him to do, and he didn't even die in the process of telling Ahab. And now Ahab comes and he meets Elijah. So we find now Elijah is about to tell Ahab what's going on. In verse number 17, "And it came to pass when Ahab saw Elijah, that Ahab said unto him, Art thou he that troubleth Israel?" What a response. Verse number 18, "And he answered, I have not troubled Israel, but thou and thy father's house, and that ye have forsaken the commandments of the Lord, and thou hast followed Balaam. Now therefore send and gather to me all Israel unto Mount Carmel, and the prophets of Baal 450, and the prophets of the groves 400, which eat at Jezebel's table. So Ahab sent unto all the children of Israel, and gathered the prophets together unto Mount Carmel. And Elijah came unto all the people, and said, How long halt ye between two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the people answered him not a word. Then said Elijah unto the people, even I only remain a prophet of the Lord. But Baal's prophets are 450 men. Let them therefore give us 2 bullocks, and let them choose 1 bullock for themselves, and cut it in pieces, and lay it on wood, and put no fire under. And I will dress the other bullock, and lay it on the wood, and put no fire under. And call ye on the name of your gods, and I will call on the name of the Lord. And the God that answereth by fire, let him be God. And all the people answered and said, It is well spoken. Verse number 25. And Elijah said unto the prophets of Baal, Choose ye 1 bullock of yourselves, and dress it first, for ye are many. And call on the name of your God, but put no fire under. And they took the bullock which was given them, and they dressed it, and called on the name of Baal from morning even until noon, saying, O Baal, hear us. But there was no voice, nor any that answered. And they leaped upon the altar which was made. And it came to pass at noon that Elijah mocked them and said, Cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is talking, or he is pursuing, or he is in a journey. Or peradventure he sleepeth and must be awaked. And they cried aloud and cut themselves after their manner with knives and lancets till the blood gushed out upon them. And it came to pass when midday was past, and they prophesied until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifices, that there was neither voice nor any to answer, nor any that regarded. Let's pause right here. We find Elijah, now bold in faith, goes before Ahab. He sees the people, how they're so unstable in their ways. And he now is no doubt confident in God. And he says, okay, we're just going to put this to the test. You're trying to serve Baal. It's not going to work for you. You're going to see devastation. But I serve the true and living God, and he's going to show himself to you. You're going to see that he is who he says he is. And him, strong in faith, now puts this task before the prophets. And they get their bullock. They set it on there. As you well know, you're familiar with the story. And we see people who really, to say the word faith wouldn't even be a good word, I don't think. Because these people, their faith is in something empty. They might have faith in it. They might be trusting in it. But it's empty. It's not going to work for them. They yell, they scream, they cut themselves, they do everything within their power to make this false god a reality. That's really, we see so many people around us on a daily basis who are constantly trying to make their false gods a reality and trying to bring something to pass. And yes, they might have a faith, but it's not a faith that is secure. And even their faith wouldn't even be strong. Because as I began to read this here, I began to see that as the day went on and they began to plead and beg with their false god to show himself to them, they eventually were up on the altar with which they were asking their God to come down and cast fire upon to burn up the offering. Not a wise decision if you have faith in the God that you are asking to do such things. To stand on the altar of with which you're saying, cast down fire that it might burn this offering up, and then you're standing on top of it. That's not a very strong faith. So they are completely lost in their ways. And yet Elijah's heart, really, I believe his heart breaks for them. And yes, he finds it, he begins to mock and says, do you not see, basically, do you not see what's going on here? Your God is a false God. He will not answer you. He's not going to answer you. And so many around us from day to day are living a life trying to please some false god and doing everything within their power, but not trusting in one that has all power. We find now Elijah stands before the people in verse number 30. It says, and Elijah said unto all the people, come near unto me. And all the people came near unto him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord that was broken down. And Elijah took 12 stones according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, unto whom the word of the Lord came, saying, Israel shall be thy name. And with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, in the name of the Lord. And he made a trench about the altar, as great as would contain 2 measures of seed. And he put the wood in order and cut the bullock in pieces and laid him on the wood and said, fill 4 barrels with water and pour it on the burnt sacrifice and on the wood. And he said, do it the second time. And they did it the second time. And he said, do it the third time. And they did it the third time. And the water ran round about the altar, and he filled the trench also with water. And it came to pass at the time of the offering of the evening sacrifices that Elijah the prophet came near, and he begins his prayer. I want us to pause right there. Because we find Elijah, remember Elijah being strong in faith. But Elijah had been walking with God. Yes, he was a prophet, but he had to exercise his faith in God. Many times God called him to do these things, and we went through the whole series of events that led up to this point. And I believe every one of those was a building block upon Elijah's faith. Because now he had an audience, and it was a great audience around him. And not only that, but now the Lord had led him to now put water upon an altar that was supposed to be burning. we find now he comes before the Lord in prayer. It says here that, "Hear me, O Lord." He says, let's go back up to 36 so that we can get the full prayer. "And it came to pass at the time of the offering of the evening sacrifices that Elijah the prophet came near and said, Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and of Israel, let it be known this day that thou art God in Israel, and that I am thy servant, and that I have done all these things at thy word. Hear me, O Lord, hear me, that this people may know that thou art the Lord God, and that thou hast turned their heart back again." Verse number 38. "Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt sacrifice, and the wood, and the stones, and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. And when all the people saw, they fell on their faces, and they said, The Lord, He is the God. The Lord, He is the God. And Elijah said unto them, Take the prophets of Baal, let not one of them escape. And they took them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon, and slew them there. And Elijah said unto Ahab, Get thee up, eat and drink, for there is a sound of abundance of rain." So we see the prophet Elijah being strong in faith. And this isn't his last test, but this is all the time will allow for us to see tonight. That he's faced with this, and God does exactly what he said. But in his prayer, did you hear him say, Lord, let it be seen that I have only done what you've asked me to do? What a blessing that is. Elijah's goal was not that people would see him, would not see who he was. But he made it very clear in his prayer. Lord, if anything's going to be accomplished here, let them see that you are God. And I am just following you. You know, in our lives, we take steps of faith, and God shows himself with it. We take another step of faith, and God shows himself with it. And we're building upon our faith, living by faith in Jesus alone, trusting, confiding in his great love. From all harm safe, in his sheltering arm, I'm living by faith and fear no harm. Elijah could stand there that day because he knew God told me to do this. And if he told me to do it, then I'm safe. Whatever the result may be, I'm safe because I just have to be obedient to him. Of course, we can be an Obadiah. And God calls us to do something by faith that we can say, but that's a scary guy. I don't know that I can do that. And no doubt those thoughts might come within our mind, but we can't let that captivate our mind. We can't let that be the controlling factor. We must let our faith in God be the controlling factor. And yes, we can come before God, and when he says, hey, I need you to talk to that person about their salvation. But God, remember back when I witnessed to that one person? Or maybe it's, remember when I witnessed to that person before? And God says, yeah, but I'm asking you to do this now. Yes, I appreciate your obedience then. But past obedience is no excuse for present obedience, for the here and now. Elijah could stand in faith and say, God, let it be known. You are God. And sure enough, the fire came down. Miraculous things happened because it even burnt the stones up. Everything was gone. stand before all of those people and it not be, look at Elijah, look what Elijah's done, look what he's done. But instead it was said, the Lord, He is the God. So tonight, God might be calling us to take a step of faith. You would know much better than I would, because God speaks to your heart, and I don't have to know what it is. I know what He's speaking to my heart about. And He's calling upon us to do something, and we have a decision to make. We have a choice to make. But may we focus on the main reason for this step of faith. Not so that we can come through it alive. Not so that we can come through on the other side and not have to worry about that anymore. Not that that wouldn't be a weight to us anymore. But may we take that step of faith, saying, Lord, I want to take this step of faith so that others can see that you're God. So that others can see that I'm just simply trying to trust and obey you. And may it be in our lives, as we take those steps of faith, that those around us that may not know God, that might be even searching for who God really is, because they've done all they can do on their little altar. They've jumped up and down. They've screamed. They've hollered. They've been emotional. They've done all of those things, but to no avail. And they're watching. May it be that in our walk of faith, they're seeing a life that says yes to God. And they're seeing God's hand upon us as He directs our path. So that they too can see and say, their Lord, He is the God. Their Lord, He is the God. Their life is so much different. Their life seems to have purpose. And when they ask God, He might not answer immediately, but they have a peace in their heart when they ask Him that everything's going to be okay. We're called, every one of us, to live a life of faith, so that others may see He is the God of our life. He is the Lord of our life. You know what that word Lord means? That means that He directs us and we follow Him. Whatever He says, I do. Being Lord over somebody or being the Lord of one's life, that means whatever the command is, yes, I'll do it. Elijah lived that kind of a life. Was he perfect? No. But he lived the life of faith, knowing that God was with him. The same God of Elijah is the same God that will be with us when we walk out of here tonight. And maybe when we have an invitation here in just a little bit, and God has spoken to your heart about one specific thing, that you say, God, I'm going to do this. I'm uncomfortable. It doesn't make sense, but I'm going to do it. Can I promise you this? That the same God that was with Elijah is going to be the same God that's with you. And His hand will lead you and give you the strength you need to do things that you can't do with your own strength. Elijah, even if he would have tried to somehow bring fire down, he would have never been able to do what God did. I believe that's why God did exactly what He did, by consuming the whole thing. He said, I'm going to take the doubts out of their mind that there was no way that Elijah did this, but it was me. How many times? I'm so thankful for God, how He blesses our life. And even us, as we seeing our life can say, God, you're good. You're with us. You're with us, dear God. So, as we close tonight, what step of faith is God calling you to? Would you acknowledge it? Don't throw out the excuses. Don't let fear grip your heart. But allow the God of your life to pull you in close so you know His presence is right there with you. Let's bow our heads tonight.